Welcome, kiddies, to another exciting adventure with the Gruesome Ghoul. I bet you wondered what had happened to me, huh? Your old buddy, the Gruesome Ghoul. Well, I've been a little underground these past few days. I am so sorry that you haven't got the pleasure of my company, but I'm back again with another chilling tale that I think you'll enjoy immensely. This week's gory goody is The Halloween House by Alan Ryan. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's tale of terror as we present The Halloween House by Alan Ryan himself, editor of the book, puts a story in his own creation. Isn't it delicious? And away we go!
Shadows now appear. What once we sang so loud and bold, we mumble now with fear. Trick or treat, we're children who live just down the street. Give us something to spend or something to eat. Let us repeat. Trick or treat.
Introduction: The Halloween House by Alan Ryan. I like Halloween. I like the cool time of year when it comes, and the autumn colors, especially the orange and black that symbolize it in America, suggesting the union of life and death. I like the long and dishonorable history of the holiday, and the rich body of lore it has acquired over the centuries. I like the time-honored ways of marking the occasion, some of which, despite their bloody sources, are, or seem, mere games for children now. I like the fact that this holiday provokes a shiver to go with a smile. I like Halloween because it reminds us of our mortality. I've written a couple of novels about the town of Deacon's Kill. For this Halloween tale, Deacon's Kill seemed the right place to go. The Halloween House by Alan Ryan. Cruel October pinched the cheeks of children and iced the blood of the elderly. The children tumbled from the school bus and laughed at the tingle and sprinted a little faster. The old folks, sitting by windows, waiting for the children to come home, looked at their whitened fingers and pressed their lips together and knew that worse was on its way. Along the breezy streets of Deacon's Kill, windows were closed the final inch, and here and there chimneys began slowly coughing gray smoke. Auto exhausts billowed white. The corners of windows grew misty. The front hallways of houses smelled faintly of closets and camphor as winter coats were taken out and placed where they'd be handy. Shoes scuffed leaves in the street, and tires crunched them, and the leaves, startled, whirled like angry birds and settled back nervously to the ground. Any day now. Any minute. The children went on laughing and running. The old folks looked again and again at their bloodless fingers, rubbed icy hands together, tugged sweaters closer around bony shoulders, and waited. Any day now. Any minute. Dale Martin shivered and then shivered again as he tried to conceal his reaction to the sharp bite of the wind. But Colleen caught it. "Cold?" she said. "No," he said quickly. "You?" He was freezing and afraid that his teeth would start chattering any second now. That would be swell, just swell. He clenched his teeth together and held his jaw muscles tight and pulled his arms in close against his body. He wished he'd worn more than a light windbreaker to school today. "A little," Colleen said. "You want to stop for coffee or hot chocolate or something?" "Please," he urged her silently. She considered the idea for a few steps. She was always doing that, Dale thought, even in the classroom when the teacher asked a question. It was one of the things he liked about her. She wasn't silly like all the other girls. She'd never just answer a question right out. She'd always stop and think first. And when she spoke, she always said exactly what she was thinking. Dale wished he could do the same right now. "That would be nice," Colleen said. "I could use a cup of coffee." But Dale could tell from her tone of voice that she was going to say something else. His fingers felt like popsicles. He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets and kept silent. Strong and silent, that was him. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw her glance sideways at him and wondered if she could tell he was freezing. But there's really something else I'd like to do. She paused, timed it perfectly, and they both knew it. If you wouldn't mind. Sure, he said. Anything, as long as it's out of the cold, and as long as it's with you. I'm a junior, he thought. You're a sophomore. I should be doing better than this. It had taken him 2 whole weeks to set up this casual walk home from school. What is it? She looked sideways at him, so he had to turn his head and face her. I want to visit the Granger place. Her eyes were bright. The haunted house? He couldn't help himself. Yes, I've heard about it ever since I moved here. I'd really like to see it, and this is the perfect time. Dale thought fast. It was at least a 15-minute walk to the Granger house from here, and another 15 back plus the rest of the walk home, plus however long they stayed at the Granger place. He wished he could look at his watch, but he didn't have the nerve. And he'd promised his mother he'd absolutely be home on time for dinner tonight, especially because everyone would be in a hurry to get to the Halloween bonfire later. His mother had been raising hell lately anyway about being stuck in the kitchen all evening because of him, but he couldn't tell Colleen he had to stop along the way to call his mother. Please, Colleen said, it's the perfect time for it. He loved the way that she left it up to him. Well then, he'd just have to make some excuse at home and take the consequences. A man's got to do what a man's got to do. Sure, he said, no problem. Come on, it's up this way. They turned a corner and a gust of wind instantly snatched at them, making them duck their heads into their collars. Thanks, Dale, she said beside him. Sure, he said. Happy Halloween, she said. She sounded so happy. Happy Halloween. Look, it's starting to get dark already. Oh, this'll be fun. It'll be great. She took her hand out of her pocket and, pressing her side against him, linked her arm with his. He forced a grin, with cheeks stiff from the cold. Happy Halloween, he said again. And they started up the long and silent road towards the Granger place, with branches creaking above their heads and the wind snapping at their faces and brittle shadows pacing them step for step. Is that it? Colleen cried. That must be it. Oh, it's creepy. She clutched dramatically at Dale's arm. That's it, said Dale. They had left the last of both houses and sidewalks some distance back and had just rounded a sharp bend in the road. A wall of dark green pines had hidden the way ahead, but now they had a perfect view of the old Granger house. It was still farther up the hillside on their right, and they'd still have some trekking to do before they actually reached the front door. But they could see it in all its spooky detail from where they stood. If the house, uninhibited for years and years, had actually stood right beside the road where it could be seen readily from up close, the local people might never have dubbed it the haunted house. But it was not beside the road, and its distance and inaccessibility, it was at the very top of a sparsely wooded hill and reachable only by a narrow driveway that curved beneath arching trees, added to its air of decrepit mystery. Now, as Dale and Colleen looked up at it, the house was outlined against the pale light of the overcast sky, and it was everything a haunted house on a hilltop ought to be. There were great rounded turrets at each corner and a row of jagged-looking gables across the top, surmounted by a cupola. Time had not been kind to the house, and even from this distance its outlines seemed almost to have been worn and rounded by the ravages of wind and weather. Oddly, there were only 2 windows at the front in all of the upper floor. The first floor had once been surrounded by what must have been a magnificent porch, but the porch was now in a sorry state of decay, the roof sagging drunkenly where it hadn't actually rotted through and collapsed. It certainly didn't look capable of surviving another winter, or for that matter, another windy night. The whole structure, looking as if it were ready to settle back into the earth, was an unhealthy shade of sickly gray. I think it's Victorian, Dale said, trying his best to sound casual, knowledgeable, worldly, mature. "It is," Colleen said. "Architecture is one of my hobbies. That's why I love exploring old houses." "Come on! I can't wait to see it up close. Oh, Dale, thank you for bringing me here." She squeezed his hand. "Sure thing," Dale said. "My pleasure." Colleen darted ahead and ducked into the overgrown driveway that obviously led up to the house. She quickly got ahead of him, then stopped and turned and laughed merrily, called, "Come on, Slowpoke! Don't leave me here all alone with the goblins!" Although Dale wasn't certain how or why, this whole thing seemed to be slipping rapidly out of his control. For a single crazy instant, he wished that Colleen were just a little bit less pretty, her lips less red, her cheeks less pink from the cold. But she was just as pretty as ever. Prettier, in fact, now that she was here with him, and she was happy. So he produced a smile and told her, "Don't worry, I'll protect you," and trudged up the driveway behind her. "No, wait," he said, and took hold of her arm. They were standing on the damp earth amid withering weeds in front of the first steps up to the porch. "Better let me test it first. Those steps don't look like they'll hold much weight." This October had been rainier than usual, and the wooden steps of the porch, exposed to the worst of the elements here at the top of the hill, seemed to have absorbed more than their share of wetness. The wood, almost entirely bare of paint, was a dark, sad brownish gray, twisted and split in places, and looked as if it might settle at any minute into the soggy earth below and become one with it. Dale was certain that the pressure of a foot would crack right through the wood. More likely, the rotting step would turn to mush beneath the weight. "Don't come up till I say it's okay," he told Colleen sternly. "Thank you, Dale," Colleen said. Dale pondered for an instant the relationship of men and women in this world, then took a deep breath and approached the steps. His shoes made a squishing noise in the dirt. To get the measure of things, he placed one foot in the middle of the bottom step and applied some pressure. The step sagged at once. It was rotten right through. He moved to the side of the steps and kicked lightly at the wooden support that hid the space beneath them. His shoe made a dull thud against it, but the wood of the upright sounded solid enough. He placed his foot at the end of the bottom step, there was no railing or banister, and leaned forward. The support swayed ever so slightly, but felt sturdy enough to hold his weight. He went up the steps to the porch, keeping carefully to the outer edge and placing each foot in front of the other. The structure moved a little beneath him, as if its base shifted just a bit in the soggy earth. But it held. "Ta-da!" he cried when he reached the porch. He stayed at the very edge here, too, not trusting the rotting wood of the floor to support his weight. He held on to a column beside the steps. Its peeling paint, soggy with rain, felt slimy beneath his hand, and turned to Colleen. "Sir Edmund Hillary," she said, looking up at him and laughing. "You bet," Dale said. He made a mental note to look that one up. "Come on." He stretched a hand down to her and warned her to stay at the edge of the steps the way he had. In a second, she was on the porch beside him. "Stay right here," he told her. "I have to test this floor." With one hand holding the slippery column, he banged a heel against the floor of the porch. Nothing happened. He banged again, a little harder. This time, his heel punched a shallow indentation into the rotting wood. "No good," he said. "We'll have to stick to the structural supports." He wished he could remember what you call those beams that hold up floors. He spotted the line of rusty nail heads across the warped boards of the porch. "Here," he said. He tested his weight, took one step, staying right on the line of nails, then another. The porch made some weary creaking noises, but it held. Now they could get to the door. "Okay," he said. "We're on our way. One haunted house coming up. Let me just make sure I can get the door open." The greenish brass plate seemed ready to pull completely free of the decaying wood, but the knob turned readily enough when he touched it. Almost instantly, the door swung open, making a soft sound, a kind of plop, as it came free of the jam, as if a rubber seal or something of the sort had been holding it in place. It was only now, with the door actually open before him on the murky interior of the house, he could smell the mustiness of it already, that Dale realized that all along he'd been hoping they wouldn't be able to get in. "Great, it's open," he said. "Terrific," Colleen said, and came and stood beside him on the doorsill. The air inside the house was thick and stale, with a hint of an odd odor that couldn't be readily named. It seemed both unpleasant and strangely familiar, all at the same time. Dale pushed the door all the way back to let in as much fresh air as possible, and the odor dissipated at once. The open door also let in some light, which was welcome because almost none at all came in through the grimy windows, further obscured as they were by the sagging roof of the porch. "Great," said Colleen. "Isn't this great?" "Great," said Dale. But actually, it wasn't as bad as it might have been. The dampness seemed not to have penetrated the interior of the house too badly, and when he tested the floor of the entryway with his heel, he found it relatively dry and solid. When he put his full weight on the floor in the middle of the foyer, holding his breath while he did it and wondering if he'd plunge right through the boards up to his neck, it held him perfectly without the slightest shift or creak. "It's okay," he told Colleen. "We're in. Better leave the door open." Stealthily now, enjoying it, they advanced a little way into the house. Even with the doors wide open, it was still dark inside. Dale was peering through an arched doorway off the foyer that must have once led to a living room or sitting room when Colleen spotted the stairs. It was a fine-looking staircase, rising up against the wall and bending around a corner just where the darkness enveloped it and protected by a fancy-looking banister with carved railings and large newel posts. "I want to go upstairs," Colleen said. "Let's go upstairs first, okay, Dale?" "I guess," Dale said. They started up the stairs. Dale insisted on going first to be sure the staircase was safe at each step. "This place must have been sealed tighter than a drum," he said over his shoulder when they were halfway up. "The damp doesn't seem to have gotten in at all." He was sliding his right hand along the wall as he went up, and it felt as dry as a bone. He tapped it with his knuckles, and it sounded perfectly solid. "No decay in here at all." "You sound like a dentist," Colleen said, and they both giggled. The second floor hallway was even darker than the foyer. They could barely see a thing, although there was very little, in fact, to see. They could just make out several doorways, one of which was slightly ajar. When Dale pushed it open, they could see that it was one of the front rooms with a single window, though the window admitted hardly any light at all. They pushed open the other doors. They all opened readily enough with the same plop the front door had made. But with the darkness of the house and the emptiness of the rooms, there was little point in exploring further. "Do you think we should go downstairs, Dale?" Colleen asked. "I think so, yeah," Dale said. When they got downstairs, they discovered that the darkness of the outside world was rapidly growing to match that of the interior of the house, and the dampness of the air rushing in now through the open front door made them both shiver. Dale thought the newel post at the bottom of the banister had felt wet to the touch, as if the chilly moisture from the outside had condensed there. "Maybe we should be getting back," Dale said. "It's getting pretty dark out." Colleen was peeking into the sitting room, but the house was so dark now that it was impossible to see anything. "I guess you're right," she said and sighed. "I wish we could see it on a bright day, or with a flashlight, or better yet by candlelight." "Yeah," said Dale. They were at the doorway when Colleen took hold of his arm. "Dale," she said, "do you think we could come back sometime? Do you think we could? I'd be afraid to come by myself." If they hurried, they'd just be able to make it back to town before the light of day was gone completely. "Absolutely," Dale said. "Your wish is my command. Be careful there on the porch and the steps." When they were safely back on the damp ground, Colleen turned to him and smiled her prettiest smile. "Thank you, Dale," she said warmly. I really mean it. Thanks a lot." And she kissed him with those lovely red lips right on his willing mouth. As they turned away from the house, his arms snugly around her shoulders and hers snugly around his waist, Dale noticed that he'd left the front door open, but he wasn't about to go back and close it now. He made it home just in the nick of time. His mother turned from the stove and looked at him significantly, but she didn't complain and only told him to hurry and wash up for dinner and to leave those muddy shoes by the door. "What has gotten into you, Dale?" his father said as soon as they were all seated at the dinner table. "You look almost happy, as if you'd shaken off the adolescent doldrums for a change." "Oh, nothing," Dale said, but he grinned pleasantly around the table, and just a bit smugly. "He's got a girlfriend," said Bethy. "Mind your own business," Dale told her. "I'm 8 years old," Bethy said calmly. "That means I'm old enough to speak my mind." Dale growled. "That means you're old enough to get your little neck "That's enough, the two of you," Dale's mother said. "Bethy, don't leave those string beans on your plate. Dale, eat your dinner. You're still a growing boy." "Yeah," said Bethy. "He needs all the strength he can get now that he has a girlfriend." "Listen," Dale began. "Cut it out," his father said. "Everybody just cut it out and eat." Every now and then through the meal, Bethy hummed, "Dale's got a girlfriend," and Dale glowered at her across the table, but nothing further was said on the subject. Dale finished ahead of the others and said very casually, "You guys mind if I go ahead to the bonfire?" "We are not you guys," his father said wearily. "Dale," his mother said, "you haven't even asked your sister if she had a good time trick-or-treating." "Did you have a good time trick-or-treating?" "Yes," Bethy said sweetly. "I got all sorts of good stuff, except I didn't get a girlfriend like you did." "You know, Mom," Dale said, "we may have to get that child replaced. I think it's defective." His father sighed. "Dale," he said, "why don't you go ahead to the bonfire and us guys will meet you there, okay?" "Hey, terrific idea, Dad. See you later." He was away from the table in a flash. "Wear something warm," his mother called after him. "And don't get into trouble," his father said. "Yeah, don't get into trouble," Bethy echoed as he was going out the door. Deacon's Kill had a giant bonfire every year on Halloween, and no one in town would have thought of missing it. The materials for the fire, old broken pieces of furniture as well as cordwood, were all stacked in place. The ground was already cleared, and portable fire extinguishers were in readiness. The people of the town had begun to gather early, and already there were dozens of children underfoot, squealing and yelling and running clumsily in their costumes. A flock of little vampires and werewolves and skeletons and ghosts. The ladies' auxiliary of the VFW had set up a table with hot coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for the children, and plenty of orange-coated cookies in the shapes of witches and pumpkins for everyone. Later, there would be hot cider and other warming beverages for the adults. Dale found his friend Jimmy almost at once. "What happened to you today?" Jimmy asked. "You disappeared into thin air right after the club meeting." "Yeah, I did, didn't I?" Dale said. He took a sip of his hot chocolate. "So? What gives?" "Wow, this hot chocolate is really great. Just hits the spot. Come on, what gives?" "Boy, Jimmy, you know," Dale said thoughtfully, "this bonfire tonight's going to be just as pretty as Ireland's prettiest Colleen." "You're kidding," Jimmy said. "I am not kidding." "I need a drink," Jimmy said. He walked over to the ladies' auxiliary table, got a cup of hot chocolate, and returned. "Wow," he said. "How far'd you get?" "Far enough." "Are you going to see her tonight?" "Is the moon made out of green cheese?" "Wow. I mean, hey, wow. I mean, like, hey, I am seriously impressed. Colleen, wow." He sipped his hot chocolate. "Poor me. I'll just have to suffer with Karen McCutcheon." "Karen McCutcheon? Surely you jest." Karen McCutcheon, sometimes pronounced McCookies, was widely reputed among the younger men of Deacon's Kill to have the biggest pair of gazangas in 2 counties. "Believe it," said Jimmy. "She's meeting me here tonight. The bonfire is not going to be the only thing burning around here." And the two of them laughed and celebrated with more hot chocolate, and then they laughed some more. They shared the afternoon's intimacies with each other, and Jimmy had to admit that Dale's taking Colleen to the haunted house had been an inspiration, a serious inspiration, clearly beating out taking Karen to Prisco's Pizza. Then Jimmy suddenly stopped laughing and began to look very thoughtful. Dale knew that look. "Uh-oh," he said. "You're about to commit an idea." Be careful, don't hurt yourself. Dale, my friend, my basic buddy, Jimmy said, I have just committed the most fantastic idea in the whole history of fantastic ideas. This time I've even outdone myself. Come on. He started away. What do you mean, come on? The girls will be here. They'll be looking for us. Not for another hour. But that's exactly why we have to get going, so we can get back quick before the girls get here. Come on. We have work to do. Places to go. Things to get. Dale, I'm telling you, seriously, you're going to thank me for this for the rest of your life. That thing is humongous, Dale said. There was genuine reverence in his voice. It was the biggest candle either one of them had ever seen. It was bright orange, round, a foot thick and 4 feet high, with a wick like a length of clothesline curling out of the tapered top. They were in the back storeroom of Morgan's Hardware Supply on School Street, where Jimmy worked 3 afternoons a week and on Saturdays. He had the keys to open the door and to turn off the alarm because he always had to go in ahead of opening time on Saturday to sweep up and straighten the stock. Where did it come from? Dale asked. Some candle company sent it to Morgan, Jimmy told him. I guess because he sold like a zillion candles or something. He was supposed to put it in the window, I guess. Humongous, Dale said. Also obscene. I knew you'd like it, Jimmy said. Come on, we gotta hurry. He knelt beside the candle. Come on! Exactly what is it you want to do with this thing, Einstein? Jimmy sighed dramatically. I have to teach you everything, don't I? Okay, listen, he said, and he began to explain, but he'd barely started before Dale saw the light. The two of them were laughing so hard that they nearly dropped the heavy candle as they struggled with it out the door. A little over an hour later, accompanied by Colleen and Karen, they were starting up the pitch-black driveway to the haunted house. Well, this is looking awfully familiar, Dale said. In more ways than one, Jimmy said. The two of them chuckled. I think I'm a little scared, said Colleen. This is creepy. What are you guys planning? Karen said. Oh, nothing, Jimmy answered. Nothing at all. You're in good hands, believe me. They all laughed, though the laughter was a little nervous. We should have brought flashlights, Colleen said. The boys had been so preoccupied with the candle at Morgan's that they'd never thought of flashlights. Dale thought it was particularly generous of Colleen to phrase the comment the way she did. They were having a hard time picking their way over the rough ground in the dark, but in a little while they emerged from the avenue of arching trees, and there was the house before them, washed in thin moonlight, a dark and blurry shadow against the nighttime sky. Creep-o-rama, breathed Karen. Dale was thinking back suddenly to how the house had looked positively warm and inviting this afternoon compared to the threatening way it seemed to loom over them now. It'll be great, Jimmy said with hearty conviction. Seriously. Besides, we've arranged a little surprise for you ladies. What's the surprise? Karen immediately wanted to know. You'll see, Jimmy told her. All in good time. Just leave everything to me and my faithful Indian companion, Dale. As they slogged across the final open distance towards the sagging front of the house, the girls paired off together, arms linked with the two boys just behind them. Jimmy dug his elbow into Dale's side. But when they stood together at the bottom of the steps, Colleen once again took Dale's arm, and he was emboldened to lead the way. Busily supervising every step of the other three, paying particular attention to Colleen's safety, he led them up the swaying steps and across the rotting porch. It seemed noticeably less sturdy than before. Or perhaps it was just showing the strain of additional weight, and into the open doorway of the house. Oh, yuck, Karen said at once. It does smell worse than before, Dale, Colleen said quietly. This was true. In fact, Dale had noticed the riper, richer smell of the house only an hour before when he'd been there for the second time that day with Jimmy. But then he'd been so out of breath from lugging the giant candle such a distance and then wrestling it into the house and setting it up in the living room that he really wasn't inclined to think too much about it. Now, on his third visit, he was unpleasantly aware that the air inside the house was indeed thick with an unpleasant and still vaguely familiar aroma. Well, we don't have to stay very long, he said. Jimmy kicked his ankle. They clung close together in the entryway, hesitating. It was impossible to see a thing. All around them, the darkness had a rich and fruity smell, not yet overpowering, but threatening to become so given time. "The door's been open since this afternoon," Dale said. "I guess the dampness just went to work on the house." This was definitely not the way he and Jimmy had envisioned things. Colleen huddled up against him and shivered. "Maybe we should close the door," he said. "It'll keep out some of the cold and the damp." The others instantly agreed. Dale found the door and swung it shut. It closed with the same soft plop it had made when first opened that afternoon. "Why don't you ladies go up and explore?" Jimmy said. "There's a staircase just ahead on the right." "How are we supposed to explore in the dark?" Karen asked. "I can't see a thing." "I don't think we should," Colleen said. Dale just wanted to get on with it. "It'll be okay," he told them. "Go ahead, just go up for a minute. Jimmy and I have to get something ready down here." Reluctantly, the girls groped their way forward until they found the banister. "Oh, gross," Karen said out of the dark. "This railing's all sticky and wet." "So's the wall," Colleen said. "It's all wet and sort of soft." "It's only the dampness," Jimmy said. "Go ahead, we'll call you in a second." "I don't think I like this," they heard Karen saying from a few steps up. "Ick! The stairs feel like they're all mushy or something." "Come on," Jimmy snapped in Dale's ear. They felt their way into the living room. The walls down here felt wet and sticky too. Bent forward, with their hands sweeping the air before them, they quickly located the upright candle. They knelt beside it at the same instant, and at the same instant the two of them cried out. The floor where they had knelt was awash in some thick and chilly wetness that immediately soaked their jeans. At the same time, a new wave of that strange odor, even riper than it was in the hall, rose up to meet them. "This is grossing me out," Dale said. "Seriously, Jimmy." "I've got the matches," Jimmy said quickly. "At least we can see if there's a dry place." The kitchen match flared, throwing flickering orange light and giant shifting shadows of themselves around the room. Jimmy touched it to the wick of the giant candle, and mercifully, the wick caught at once, burning with a bright and steady flame. But their relief drained instantly away when they looked around the room. The walls themselves seemed to be rotting and sliding down toward the floor. Great stringy, ropey-looking things hung in dripping loops from the ceiling. The floor was covered with a pool of slick wetness, and everything glistened with some foul and smelly moisture. They both held their breaths for an instant. Then Jimmy said in a tone of genuine awe, "This is seriously disgusting." Trying not to breathe too deeply, Dale said, "You can say that again." "This is..." But at that very moment, the two girls shrieked hysterically and came thudding down the stairs. One or both of them must have tripped, or most likely slipped, and they both came crashing down in a tangle, landing with a splashing slide in the foyer. The boys, breathing hard, slipped and slid over to them and helped them to their feet. Sobbing, Colleen managed to say, It's as if the whole house was rotting away. My hand went right through the wall." It was all squishy," Karen managed to gasp. Like the stairs. That's why we fell." "What's that light?" Colleen asked suddenly. She lifted her head and looked around. "Oh," she gasped when she saw the slimy walls and the ropey things dripping from the ceiling. "A candle," Jimmy said. "We got a candle." "Let's get out of here," Dale said. Without another word, the four of them rushed to the door. Dale pulled at the doorknob, but the door would not budge. He tried again. Then Jimmy pushed him aside and tried too, but with no success. When they looked more carefully at the door, they saw that it had sort of melted and run, becoming one with the wall all around it. The girls were sobbing now, and the boys were doing their best not to. Everywhere they looked, the house seemed to shift slightly. The angles and corners and the line where wall met ceiling were no longer sharp or clear. Everything was subtly moving, and more of the ropey things were dropping from the ceiling, making a tangled web all around them. They backed into the living room. At least there was some light in there, just as the staircase collapsed entirely with a wet sucking sound. It brought down part of the upstairs floor with it, enough to seal off the entrance to the living room with a slimy, stinking heap. A glance showed that the windows here had blended into the walls the same way the front door had. They were trapped. Then they realized, in the light of the candle, what none of them had had time to notice before. The entire inside of the house had been painted, if it had actually once been paint, a startling and vivid shade of orange. But no, they realized at once with horror, it wasn't orange. It was even worse. It was pumpkin. "Put out the candle," Colleen whispered. "Maybe that will help." Jimmy pinched it out, but the darkness was even worse. It enhanced their other senses, and they were horribly aware of the sound of softly sliding walls, liquid splashing as it dripped from above, and the thick smell in the air. "Light it again," Dale whispered. "At least we'll have some light." Jimmy relit the candle, and they clung to one another. Now, there was nothing left to do but wait. They huddled together, trembling, as the house, filled with the guttering light of the melting candle and giving forth more and more of that same faintly sweet odor of decaying vegetable matter, slowly rotted and collapsed in around them.
Wasn't that a terrifying tale? I guess they got their jack-o'-lantern after all. Although something tells me that neither one of them got to score with their girls. Unless they liked rolling around in rotted pumpkin. Well, that was The Halloween House by Alan Ryan. Stay tuned for another story coming soon from your old friend, the Gruesome Ghoul. Pleasant dreams, kiddies.
Trick or treat, trick or treat. When you hear the doorbell ring, ding, 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 ding. Trick or treat, trick or treat. Lots of candy, gee, it's dandy. Trick or treat. Painting up your cheeks and nose, dressing up in funny clothes. Lots of candy, gee, it's dandy. Trick or treat. Dum dum dum, dum dum dum. Cinderella, Peter Pan, walking with a monster man. Dum dum dum, dum dum dum. Lots of candy, gee, it's dandy. Trick or treat. La la la, la la la. Goblins, witches all about. Get you if you don't watch out. La la la, la la la. Lots of candy, gee, it's dandy. Trick or treat.